Chapter 1. The heat of the sacrificial pit blistered Zilia's skin. "Burn the mute." The high priest's voice cracked like a whip over the roaring flames. Thousands of blood-ash wolves howled. The noise was deafening, a chorus demanding blood. Zilia gripped the scorching silver bars of her cage, the metal bit into her palms, burning her skin. She didn't flinch. She refused to give them the satisfaction. If she was going to die today, she would die with her secrets intact. "Drop the cage," the priest ordered. The iron chains groaned above her. The cage tilted heavily toward the blinding fire. Then, the blood moon vanished. A monstrous shadow blotted out the night sky. The earth violently shuddered as a colossal beast crashed onto the stone altar. An ash-colored wolf, impossibly large, radiating an oppressive, suffocating weight that brought the entire pack to a dead halt. Varkan, the ashen tyrant. His giant paws crushed the stone beneath him, glowing golden eyes locked onto the high priest. The air cracked with his alpha aura. "My alpha," the priest stammered, his bravado instantly evaporating. "The sacrifice is—" The wolf lunged. A sickening thud echoed over the pit as the massive beast swatted the priest. The man's body slammed against the stone pillars and slid to the ground, completely still. No one breathed. The crowd of thousands fell into a terrified, suffocating silence. Shadows swirled around the beast. The giant wolf dissolved, leaving a towering man standing in the firelight. A jagged black scar slashed across his left pectoral, pulsing with a dark, cursed energy. "Who gave the order to burn my property?" Varkan demanded. Not a single wolf dared to speak. They dropped to their knees, bowing their heads to the stone. Varkan marched to the cage. His head pounded, the soul thirst, the curse that drove him to the edge of madness every new moon, was screaming in his skull. But as he stepped closer to the silver bars, the agonizing voices in his mind began to quiet. It was her, the prisoner. Her scent, wild mint and ancient magic, wrapped around his senses, acting as an instant balm to his cursed mind. He grabbed the silver door and ripped it off its hinges with his bare hands. The metal shrieked and snapped. He tossed the ruined door into the flames. "Get out," he commanded. Zilia stayed planted. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes, sharp as shattered glass, glared back at the tyrant. Varkan stepped into the narrow cage. He reached down and grabbed her arm, hoisting her forcefully to her feet. The second his skin touched hers, a violent shock wave snapped through the air between them. Thump. Zilia froze. Her breath caught. Thump. Their heartbeats slammed into perfect synchronization. One rhythm, the ultimate, undeniable pull of the mate bond. Varkan's fingers curled tighter around her arm. His glowing golden eyes widened in shock, then instantly darkened into absolute disgust. "You," he snarled, his voice a lethal rumble. "A filthy war prisoner, a mute enemy." Zilia yanked her arm, trying to break his grip. He didn't budge. She tilted her chin up, silently challenging him. "Speak," he ordered, leaning into her space. Silence stretched between them. She offered him nothing but a death glare. "Defiant," Varkan mocked. "Let's see how long that lasts." He hauled her up, throwing her over his broad shoulder. Zilia struck his back, her fists hammering against his scarred muscles. She kicked and writhed, but he held her in place with iron strength. Bramwell stepped out from the kneeling crowd, his dark cloak billowing in the hot wind. "Alpha," Bramwell drawled, a sarcastic smirk playing on his lips. "Are we saving the firewood now? Because that looks like a high-risk enemy to me." "Watch your mouth, Bramwell," Varkan snapped, stepping down from the altar, "or I'll tear it off." Bramwell raised his hands in mock surrender. Just asking for the pack, my liege. They seem confused. Varkan turned his blazing gaze to the thousands of wolves surrounding the pit. She is no sacrifice. His voice boomed, demanding absolute, unquestioning submission. She is mine, my personal blood reserve. Anyone who touches her, anyone who even looks at her, loses their head. Do you understand? Yes, Alpha. The pack roared in unison, heads pressed lower to the ground. Varkan turned to leave. As he shifted Zelia's weight on his shoulder, his face brushed against the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply. He only meant to breathe in the mint scent, to completely silence the lingering ache in his mind. Instead, Varkan stopped dead in his tracks. His entire body went rigid. The overwhelming alpha aura surrounding him violently flickered. He dropped Zelia to her feet so fast she stumbled against the stone altar. His large hands clamped onto her shoulders, his grip frantic. "Look at me," he breathed. His voice wasn't an alpha command anymore. It was raw, unadulterated horror. Zelia met his gaze. His golden eyes were wide, trembling with a dangerous, chaotic energy. He leaned down, his nose violently brushing her collarbone, inhaling sharply again. "Why?" Varkan whispered, the word carrying through the dead silence of the night. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Why does your blood smell like my dead brother's soul?" Chapter 2. Xylia sat on the edge of the massive fur-covered bed. The heavy silver cuffs around her wrists burned her skin, but she kept her face completely blank. The heavy oak door swung open. Bramwell strolled in, casually balancing a silver tray on one hand. "Room service for the high-risk prisoner," Bramwell announced, a mocking grin on his face. He took 2 steps into the room. Instantly, the floor lit up with violent crackling red runes. "Shh!" A shockwave of defensive magic slammed into Bramwell. He crashed to his knees with a sharp groan. The silver tray clattered, spilling food across the stone floor. The invisible warding trap, set by the alpha to obliterate intruders, began to hum, trapping the beta in a suffocating cage of magical pressure. "Well, that's embarrassing," Bramwell wheezed, struggling to lift his head. "A little help?" Zelia stood up. She walked calmly toward the glowing red power core embedded in the stone wall. "Don't touch that," Bramwell gasped. "The silver cuffs will react. It'll fry your nervous system." She ignored him. Zelia raised her cuffed hands. Without a single trace of hesitation, she slammed her bare fist directly into the magical core. Glass shattered, sparks rained down. The red light died instantly. Bramwell slumped forward, gasping for air. He stared at her, his sarcastic smirk entirely gone. "You're a human prisoner," Bramwell breathed, eyes wide. "You shouldn't have the physical strength to break an alpha's ward." Zelia just stared at him, cold and unblinking. She didn't need to speak. Her message was clear. "I am not what you think I am." The door suddenly slammed open, hitting the stone wall with a deafening crack. Varkan stood in the frame. His massive frame filled the doorway. He looked terrible. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his chest heaved. The jagged black scar across his pectoral pulsed with a sickly, erratic light. His golden eyes darted from the broken ward to Bramwell, then locked onto Zelia. "Who told you to come in here?" Varkan snarled, his voice a dangerous, low rumble. Bramwell scrambled to his feet, dusting off his cloak. "Just bringing your guest some food. Seems she doesn't need my help, though." "Get out." Bramwell didn't waste a second. He vanished into the hall, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. The click of the lock echoed in the silent room. The air instantly grew heavy. The overwhelming scent of rain, ash, and dominant alpha filled Zelia's lungs. She took a step back, her defensive instincts flaring. Varkan stepped closer. His hands were shaking. He clenched them into tight fists to hide the tremor. "Get on the bed," Varkan ordered. Zelia planted her feet. She crossed her arms, tilting her chin up. "I am not asking," he growled, taking another step. The space between them vanished. "The soul thirst is tearing my mind apart. Your scent stops it." "Lie down." She shook her head, a silent, absolute refusal. Varkan leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You think this is a game? You smell like the dead brother that haunts my nightmares. I should snap your neck just for that." He breathed in sharply, his voice dropping to a desperate rasp. "And yet, you are the only thing keeping me from going insane. Your choice. You sleep here, or I lose my mind and tear this castle down." Zelia didn't flinch. She stared directly into his glowing eyes. She saw the challenge. Varkan didn't wait for her permission. He reached out, grabbed her by the waist, and lifted her off the floor. She thrashed, silently fighting his grip, but his physical strength was terrifying. He dropped her onto the center of the massive mattress and followed her down immediately. He pinned her in place, his heavy arm wrapping tightly around her waist. He pulled her rigid body flush against his hard, scarred chest. Zelia stopped breathing. Varkan buried his face deep into the crook of her neck. He didn't bite. He didn't kiss her. He simply inhaled deeply, burying his nose against her skin. A violent shudder ripped through his massive frame. The tension in his muscles slowly began to unravel. Through the undeniable pull of the mate bond, the emotional wall between them shattered. Zelia felt it. A tidal wave of pure agony crashed into her chest. It wasn't her pain, it was his. It was the feeling of a soul being ripped to shreds, echoing with unbearable loneliness and screaming in the dark. Her hatred wavered. Her fingers, which had been curled into tight fists ready to strike him, slowly loosened against the mattress. His breath was hot against her collarbone. "Don't move," he whispered, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Just don't move." For hours, the only sound in the room was their synchronized heartbeats. Then the clock struck midnight. Varkan's body violently convulsed. Zelia gasped as his grip tightened like a vice. The golden light in his eyes vanished, replaced by an empty, terrifying pitch black. The curse had taken full control. He flipped her onto her back. His massive weight pinned her down, trapping her completely. Zelia shoved her cuffed hands against his shoulders, but he didn't even blink. He was completely feral. "Mine," the beast hissed, the voice entirely inhuman. His jaw snapped open, sharp fangs elongated from his gums. Without warning, he plunged his teeth into the soft skin of her neck. A sharp gasp escaped Zelia's lips. Blood welled up instantly, staining the white fur beneath them. The pain was blinding, but she didn't scream. She didn't thrash. Instead, Zelia forced her right hand upward. She pressed her bloody palm flat against the glowing black scar on his chest. Her eyes, usually dull and guarded, flared with a blinding, terrifying silver light. For the first time in 10 years, the mute prisoner opened her mouth to speak. "Lydia," she commanded, her voice ringing with ancient, absolute power. "Stitch." The entire castle violently shuddered. Chapter 3. Thousands of luminous silver threads erupted from Zelia's bloody palm. They didn't tear Varkan's flesh. They sank directly into his chest, weaving through his ribs and wrapping tightly around his raging alpha core. The sheer force of the magic blasted him backward. Varkan crashed against the heavy oak headboard. The silver strings pulled taut, pinning his massive arms and legs to the mattress. The feral darkness in his eyes shattered. He blinked, gasping for air as his golden irises returned. He was back in his own mind. He yanked his arms, trying to break the invisible bonds. The threads flared with blinding light, holding him completely paralyzed. "What did you do to me?" Varkan snarled. His chest heaved with fury. "Release me. Now." Zelia sat up slowly. She wiped the blood from her bitten neck. When she looked at him, her eyes held zero fear. "I kept you from ripping my throat out," she replied. Her voice was raspy from 10 years of silence, but it cut through the room like a silver blade. Varkan froze. His jaw tightened as he stared at her. "You can speak. I chose not to, until now." "Take this magic off me, he ordered, his voice dropping to a lethal, vibrating threat. "If you do not release me in the next 3 seconds, I will tear you apart." "If I let go, the curse takes over again," Zelia shot back. "You stay put. I am the alpha of Blood Ash. I do not take orders from a prisoner." "You do tonight." Clack, clack, clack. The sharp sound of a cane hitting the stone floor echoed from the shadows. Lady Eldoris stepped into the moonlight. The old oracle's milky white, blind eyes seemed to pierce straight through the darkness. She wore a mocking smile. "I warned you, boy," Eldoris chuckled, her voice dry as dust. "The past always collects its debts." Varkan thrashed against the silver bindings. The bed frame groaned under his immense strength. "Eldoris, get this witch off me, or I will burn your sanctuary to the ground." "You cannot burn what has already saved you," Eldoris said calmly. She pointed a gnarled finger toward the bed. "Look at her, Varkan. Really look at her. A soul stitcher. I thought your kind went extinct when the Ashen Army marched on the valley." Celia's face hardened into stone. "We did. I am the last." Varkan stopped struggling. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He stared at the silver threads connecting her hand to his chest. "You weave souls," Varkan breathed, the pieces rapidly falling into place. "That's why your blood smells like him. You patched my brother's rotting soul before he died." "I gave him peace," Zelia spat, leaning closer, refusing to back down from his intense glare. "Something you know absolutely nothing about." Varkan's fangs bared. "You helped my enemy." "I helped a dying man." Before Varkan could roar his counter, the stained glass window exploded. Shards of glass rained across the floor as 4 dark figures dropped into the room. Rebel wolves. Their eyes were devoid of pack loyalty, filled only with murderous intent. "The Alpha is bound," the lead assassin shouted, raising a heavy crossbow. "Take his head." Varkan violently ripped at the threads. The silver magic burned his skin, but he didn't care. "Cowards," he roared. "Face me when I am unbound." The assassins didn't waste time talking. The leader leveled the crossbow. The heavy bolt loaded inside gleamed with a sickening, toxic purple hue. Black silver. Pure, unfiltered death for any alpha. "This is for the packs you slaughtered," the rebel sneered. He pulled the trigger. The heavy bolt sliced through the air, aimed directly at Varkan's exposed heart. Varkan couldn't dodge. He couldn't shift. He glared at the incoming projectile, his jaw locked in furious, unbreakable pride. He would not flinch. "No!" Zelia screamed. She didn't think. She threw her body over his. Thwack! The sickening impact echoed through the massive chamber. Varkan's eyes widened in absolute horror. "Zelia!" Her body went entirely still. She collapsed against his chest, the heavy crossbow bolt buried deep in her back. The rebels cheered, stepping forward to finish the job, but Zelia didn't bleed red. A brilliant starlight silver liquid poured from her wound. It dripped down her side and fell onto Varkan's chest. The exact second the silver drop hit his skin, a massive, deafening shockwave of pure energy exploded outward. The rebel, taking a step forward, froze mid-stride, the shattered glass falling from the window suspended in mid-air. The dust motes stopped drifting. Time violently stopped. The entire room was frozen in absolute silence. The only things moving were the silver tears falling from Zelia's eyes as she slumped lifelessly against the ashen tyrant. Chapter 4. The silver glow from Zelia's blood faded. Time violently snapped back into motion. The suspended shards of glass crashed against the stone floor. The rebel assassins lunged forward, raising their weapons to finish the job. But the silver threads binding Varkan had shattered the moment Zelia lost consciousness. He was free. Varkan roared. The sound didn't come from a man. It came from an ancient, world-ending beast. The sheer, overwhelming force of his alpha aura exploded outward. The pressure was so intense, it cracked the stone walls. The 4 assassins were instantly crushed against the floor. They choked, completely paralyzed by the terrifying weight of his raw power. "You touched her," Varkan whispered. His voice was terrifyingly calm. He didn't bother shifting into his wolf form. He didn't need to. He stepped forward, his golden eyes burning with absolute destruction. The impact of his strikes echoed like thunder. In less than 10 seconds, the assassins were thrown across the room. Their bodies went entirely still. The threat was obliterated. Varkan didn't spare them a single glance. He dropped to his knees, catching Zelia before she slipped onto the broken glass. "Zelia," he commanded, his large hands frantically pressing against the wound on her back. "Wake up." She didn't move. Her skin was turning as cold as ice. The silver starlight liquid had stopped flowing. "Look at me," he yelled. His voice broke. Silence answered him. 4 days later. The underground ice vault was freezing, reserved only for the fallen kings of blood ash. Varkan sat on the frosted stone floor. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. His clothes were stained, his hair wild, and his knuckles bruised. He stared at Zelia's pale, lifeless body resting on the frozen altar. He reached out, his trembling fingers gently tracing her freezing cheek. "You don't get to do this," Varkan whispered. The ruthless ashen tyrant was entirely gone, replaced by a broken man. "You don't get to die to save a monster like me." He pressed his forehead against her icy hand. A choked sob tore through his chest. "I will burn my own throne," he pleaded, his voice cracking in the dark. "I will surrender the crown. I will let you walk away and never look for you. Just open your eyes, please. Punish me, hate me, but do not leave me in this dark." He waited. He listened for that singular heartbeat. Nothing. Bang! The heavy iron doors of the vault were violently kicked open. "I gave a direct order that no one enters," Varkan roared, instantly turning, his fangs bared in defense of his mate. Bramwell stood in the doorway, breathing hard. He looked exhausted, holding a tattered, blood-stained parchment. "I don't care about your orders," Bramwell snapped, stepping into the freezing room. "You're acting like a dead man, and the pack is falling apart upstairs without an alpha. Get out, Bramwell, or I will kill you myself." "Do it after you read this," Bramwell shouted, throwing the heavy parchment onto the frozen floor. It slid and hit Varkan's boot. Lady Eldoris found it in the deepest archives. It's ancient magic, dark magic. Varkan didn't look at the paper. He glared at his beta. Nothing works. Her soul is fading. "Because she is a soul stitcher, you idiot," Bramwell yelled, completely abandoning all respect. "She doesn't heal with herbs or spells. She heals with life force. And right now, she has none left." Varkan froze. His golden eyes slowly dropped to the parchment. "Read it," Bramwell demanded, pointing at the ancient text. The only way to reignite a Stitcher's soul is with an alpha core, a willing sacrifice. Varkan picked up the heavy paper. His eyes scanned the violent, jagged runes. It requires half of my life force, Varkan read aloud. If she rejects it, we both die. Exactly, Bramwell said, his voice dropping into a grave warning. It's suicide, Varkan. You rip your core open, you lose half your power, your lifespan, your strength, and she still might not wake up. Varkan dropped the parchment. He looked back at Zelia's pale face. The hesitation lasted less than a second. She took a poison bolt for me, Varkan stated, his voice completely hollow of fear. She can have my entire soul if she asks for it. Bramwell stepped forward, alarmed. Wait, we need to prepare the ritual. Get out, Varkan ordered. Varkan, if you do it wrong, your chest will cave in. I said, get out, Varkan roared, his eyes flashing with lethal authority. Bramwell hesitated, then quickly backed out of the vault, pulling the heavy iron doors shut. Varkan stood alone with the silence. He looked down at his own chest, right over his violently beating heart. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He raised his right hand, his fingernails elongated, transforming into razor-sharp, lethal wolf claws. Without a single word of prayer, Varkan plunged his claws directly into his own chest. Chapter 5. A blinding golden light erupted in the dark ice vault. Varkan didn't scream. He grit his teeth as he ripped the glowing, pulsing half of his alpha core from his own chest. The sheer agony brought him to his knees, but his hand didn't waver. He pressed the burning sphere of golden energy directly over Zelia's still heart. Take it, Varkan commanded, his voice a ragged, dying breath. Take it all. The golden light shattered into a million sparks, sinking deep into Zelia's pale skin. Varkan's vision blacked out. His massive body collapsed against the frozen stone floor, his life force rapidly draining away. The silence returned to the vault. He closed his eyes, waiting for the end. Then, a sharp, desperate gasp shattered the quiet. Zelia shot up on the ice altar. Her eyes snapped open, glowing with a fierce, brilliant silver. She clutched her chest, feeling the overwhelming, heavy beat of an alpha's heart echoing perfectly with her own. She looked down. Varkan lay motionless on the frost-covered stone. No, Zelia breathed. She scrambled off the altar and dropped to her knees beside him. She pressed her hands against his chest. The wound was massive, radiating a lethal, cold, dark magic. Varkan, open your eyes, she yelled, shaking his heavy shoulder. His eyelids fluttered. He looked up at her, a faint, arrogant smirk playing on his pale lips. You look better. You arrogant, reckless fool, Zelia choked out. You tore out your own core. You needed it. I am your enemy, she screamed, her voice cracking. I am a war prisoner. Why would you do this? Varkan reached up. His trembling, cold hand cupped her cheek. He wiped away a silver tear that had escaped her eye. Because you are mine, he whispered, and I protect what is mine. Her defensive walls instantly shattered. The hatred she had clung to for 10 years vanished, completely eradicated by the desperate, foolish sacrifice of the tyrant beneath her. I won't let you die, Zelia swore. She slammed both hands violently against his chest. Aelidia, she chanted. Thousands of brilliant silver threads exploded from her fingertips. They wove rapidly into his torn flesh, pulling the fatal wound closed, stitching his fractured soul back together with her own magic. The effort drained her instantly, her vision blurring, but she refused to stop. Varkan grabbed her wrists. Stop. You will kill yourself. Shut up and let me save you, she snapped, fighting his grip. With a sudden burst of primal strength, Varkan pulled her down. She crashed against his chest. He rolled, pinning her to the freezing stone floor. The pain in his chest was gone, replaced by a raging, unstoppable inferno of mate energy. His golden eyes flared, blazing with absolute, unfiltered obsession. "You don't hate me anymore, Stitcher," he stated. It wasn't a question. Xylia looked up at the terrifying ashen tyrant. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I hate that I don't," she breathed. Varkan didn't waste another second. He crashed his lips onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of fire and ice, a desperate, bruising claim that ignited every nerve in Xelia's body. The heavy scent of rain and ash overwhelmed her senses. She didn't fight him. She tangled her fingers into his hair, pulling him closer, matching his fierce desperation. Varkan pulled back just enough to look at her, his fangs elongated, gleaming in the dim light. "Mine," he growled. "Yours," Xelia answered. He buried his face into the crook of her neck and bit down. The true marking. A shock wave of pure, blinding heat rushed through their veins. The magical bond snapped into place, sealing their souls together for eternity. Xelia gasped, her nails digging into his back as she accepted the claim, letting the Alpha's power wash over her entirely. Then, the ground violently shook. Xelia and Varkan froze. The ice vault cracked. A deafening, horrific screech echoed from deep beneath the earth. It wasn't the howl of a wolf. It was the sound of something dead. Varkan instantly stood, pulling Xylia behind him, his claws extended. Bramwell kicked the ruined iron doors open, completely out of breath. "Alpha!" Bramwell yelled, panic written all over his face. "We have a massive problem. The abyss. It cracked open." "What came out of it?" Varkan demanded. "Undead," Bramwell gasped. "Hundreds of them. But that's not the worst part." The stone floor beneath them split open. Dark, toxic fog poured into the room. From the shadows, a massive wolf stepped forward. Its fur was rotting, its eyes entirely pitch black, leaking an unnatural purple smoke. Varkan's entire body went rigid. His breath hitched. Xelia stepped out from behind him, her eyes widening in absolute horror. She recognized the twisted, broken soul inside that beast. "That's impossible," Varkan whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. "He's dead. I saw him die." The undead beast shifted into a man. He wore broken armor, smiling a twisted, soulless grin. "Hello, little brother," the man hissed. Then his black eyes snapped to Xelia. "And hello to the little Stitcher who trapped me in the dark." Chapter 6. 10 years in the dark, Saltwelfs. The undead brother hissed, his voice echoing like grinding stones. "You took my throne, Varkan, and you took my killer as your mate." Varkan didn't flinch. He stepped in front of Xelia, shielding her entirely. "You lost your mind to the dark magic," Varkan growled, his golden eyes blazing with lethal fire. "You slaughtered our people. You belonged in the dirt." The brother laughed. It was a hollow, soulless sound. He pointed a rotting finger at Xelia. "Ask her," he mocked. "Ask the little Stitcher what she really did. She didn't heal my soul, Varkan. She ripped it apart. She slit my throat on the altar and used my blood to curse me into the abyss." Xelia stepped out from behind Varkan's massive frame. She didn't hide. She didn't cower. "I sealed you away to save him," Xelia stated coldly. "You were going to kill him. I made my choice." The brother sneered. "And now you sleep in his bed. How poetic. Do you hate her now, little brother?" Varkan slowly turned his head. He looked down at Xelia. The heavy silence stretched between them for exactly 1 second. Then Varkan grabbed her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I don't care what she did to you," Varkan said, his voice absolute. "She is my mate. I trust her with my life, and I am going to bury you twice." The brother's face twisted into pure, unhinged fury. "Kill them both," he roared. Hundreds of rotting, undead wolves surged forward from the abyss. The cavern walls shook as the swarm of nightmare creatures rushed the altar. "Incoming!" Bramwell yelled from the doorway. The beta threw a handful of glowing blue crystals across the floor. Lady Eldoris now. The blind oracle slammed her wooden cane into the stone. "Burn, you rotting pests!" A massive wall of explosive magical fire erupted from the crystals. The front line of undead wolves slammed into the invisible barrier, instantly turning to ash upon impact. The shockwave rattled the entire vault. But there were too many. The barrier began to crack. "Hold the line," Varkan commanded. He let go of Zelia's hand and charged. He didn't need a weapon. He was the weapon. Varkan's fists ignited with pure golden alpha fire. Every punch he threw shattered the undead into dust. He moved with terrifying, blinding speed, tearing through the swarm to clear a path. Zelia fought right beside him. She raised both hands, her eyes glowing a blinding silver. "Elidia," she chanted. Thick, glowing silver threads shot from her palms like whips. They sliced through the dark fog, wrapping around the undead beasts and violently ripping their dark magic apart. They fought back to back. Perfect synchronization. One mind when one lethal force. "You cannot win," the brother screamed over the chaos. "I am immortal." "Nothing is immortal," Bramwell shouted back, throwing another explosive trap. "Except maybe my stunning good looks." The battle raged, the vault filled with smoke, ash, and blinding light. But Zelia could feel it. The magic was draining them. Varkan was fighting with only half a core. He was slowing down. His golden fire flickered. Suddenly, a massive shock wave threw Bramwell and Eldoris against the far wall. The magical barrier completely shattered. The brother lunged through the smoke. He didn't aim for Zelia. He aimed directly for Varkan's blind spot. His hand had transformed into a jagged blade of dark magic, aiming straight for Varkan's already wounded chest. Varkan was pinned down by 3 undead wolves. He couldn't turn in time. "Varkan!" Zelia screamed. She didn't think. She knew exactly what she had to do. The ancient rule of the soul stitchers. To bind a soul of absolute darkness, one must surrender their own light. She stepped directly into the brother's path. "No!" Varkan roared, ripping the beasts off him. But he was too late. Zelia didn't use a shield. She didn't use her threads to fight. She placed her hands flat against her own chest, right over the pulsing golden alpha core Varkan had given her. She looked directly into Varkan's terrified eyes. A sad, beautiful smile crossed her face. "I am sorry, Varkan," she whispered. The mate bond carried her voice straight into his mind. "It is time I give you your heart back." Zelia violently pulled the golden core from her chest. She crushed it in her hands. A cataclysmic explosion of silver starlight erupted. It wasn't fire. It was pure, unadulterated void magic. The brother screamed in agony as the silver light hit him. The light acted like a massive black hole. It latched onto the dark magic, violently ripping the brother and his entire undead army off the ground. They were sucked directly into the blinding vortex of Zelia's collapsing soul. "Zelia!" Varkan bellowed, throwing himself toward her. He reached out, his hand frantically swiping through the air. He caught nothing. The undead army vanished. The brother vanished, and Zelia disintegrated, Her body dissolved into millions of glowing silver starlight particles, floating aimlessly in the cold, empty vault. She was gone. Varkan crashed to his knees on the freezing stone. He stared at his empty hands. The silence in the vault was absolute, broken only by the sound of the ashen tyrant screaming in pure, soul-shattering despair. Chapter 7. The silver dust settled on the frozen floor. "Alpha," Bramwell whispered, his voice trembling. He took a hesitant step forward. She's gone." Varkan didn't move. He stared at the empty space where Zelia had just been. His remaining half of the Alpha core burned in his chest, a jagged, agonizing reminder of what he had lost. No. Varkan's voice was dangerously quiet. "Varkan, please," Bramwell pleaded. The magic consumed her entirely. There was no body to bury. Varkan slowly stood up. His golden eyes flared, completely devoid of grief. They were filled with absolute tyrannical fury. "A mate bond does not end until I say it does," Varkan snarled. He raised his hand. He bit down on his own wrist, drawing fresh blood. "Boy, what are you doing?" Lady Eldoris gasped, tapping her cane frantically. "Do not mess with the veil." "I am the Ashen Tyrant," Varkan commanded, his voice echoing with world-shattering authority. "And today, death answers to me." He slammed his bloody palm onto the freezing stone altar. He pushed every single drop of his remaining alpha fire into the ancient rock. The sheer force of his will violently ripped the air apart. A jagged, glowing black tear ripped through the center of the vault. The entrance to the dreamscape, the realm of the dead and the lost. Without a single second of hesitation, Varkan stepped into the void. The cold was unimaginable. He floated in a massive, endless sea of dark shadows and shattered memories. He pushed through the crushing gravity, his golden eyes scanning the terrifying darkness. Then he saw it, a single glowing silver thread. Varkan lunged. He grabbed the thread and pulled violently. The shadows collapsed. Zelia appeared, her body translucent, drifting away into the absolute dark. Her eyes were closed. She was slipping into eternal sleep. Varkan grabbed her shoulders. He pulled her flush against his chest. "Did I give you permission to leave?" he growled, his voice vibrating through the empty realm. Zelia's eyes fluttered open. Her silver irises were dim. "Varkan, you shouldn't be here. You will die." "Then we die together," he stated. He didn't give her a chance to argue. Varkan crashed his lips onto hers. It was a kiss that defied the laws of the universe. Pure, burning possessiveness surged from his broken soul into hers. He poured his life force, his fire, and his undeniable alpha command directly into her fading spirit. Zelia gasped against his mouth. The heat was blinding. The emotional collision of their souls fused them together. He gripped her waist, his heavy hands anchoring her to reality, refusing to let the void take a single piece of her. "You are mine," Varkan breathed against her lips, his grip tightening. "Come back with me." Zelia tangled her fingers into his hair. The hatred was gone. The fear was gone. She felt the overwhelming, intoxicating weight of his love. "I am yours," she answered. The dreamscape violently shattered. A blinding explosion of gold and silver light blasted them out of the void. Varkan and Zelia crashed hard onto the stone floor of the ice vault. The black tear in the air snapped shut behind them. Varkan immediately pushed himself up. He looked down at the woman beneath him. Zelia took a deep, shuddering breath. Her chest rose and fell perfectly. She was alive, but she was different. Her pale skin now radiated a flawless, ethereal silver glow. The terrifying power of the void had not destroyed her. She had consumed it. She was no longer just a stitcher. She was absolute power incarnate. Lady Eldoris dropped to her knees, her blind eyes wide with awe. "The Silver Queen," the oracle whispered, pressing her forehead to the floor. Bramwell immediately followed, dropping to one knee, bowing his head in total submission. Zelia sat up. She looked at Varkan. The ruthless ashen tyrant was covered in blood, dirt, and ice, but his golden eyes looked at her like she was the only thing existing in the universe. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "My queen," Varkan murmured. Zelia smiled, a dangerous, beautiful smirk. She stood up, pulling him to his feet. "Let's go take our throne." The glorious night ended. Peace fell over the Blood Ash Kingdom. Varkan and Zelia ruled together, completely unmatched in their terrifying power. But deep underground, far beneath the castle, lay the sacrificial pit where Zelia was first locked in the iron cage. The heavy stone was stained from the battle. A single drop of Zelia's silver blood, spilled during Chapter 1, had seeped deep into the cracks of the ancient altar. It dripped down into a hidden, forgotten cavern below. Plop! The silver drop hit a massive obsidian rock. The rock trembled. A slow, terrifying crack ran straight down the middle of the black stone. The stone split open. From the pitch-black darkness, a single gigantic eye snapped open. It burned with an unholy, ancient crimson fire, and something massive began to breathe.